Hello there and welcome to the Alberta Update, a look at what's happening in your province. I am your host, Bruce McAllister. Thanks for being with us. Today, a special budget edition, Budget 2024 from the Alberta government. We will have several conversations with ministers to find out where your money is being spent, what programs, what initiatives are going to be put in place. We will have the Minister of Finance and the President of the Treasury Board, Nate Horner, joining us shortly. We will also hear from the Ministers of Education, of Advanced Education, of Seniors, Community and Social Services, and Mental Health and Addiction. Dan Williams will be along as well. All that coming up on this special 2024 budget edition of the Alberta Update.
Mr. Speaker, Budget 2024 is a responsible plan for a growing province. It's the budget Alberta needs today, while ensuring future generations can live, work, and raise their families in what will continue to be the very best place in the world to call home. Thank you.
That is the President of Treasury Board and Finance Minister Nate Horner delivering the budget, the 2024 Alberta budget in the Alberta Legislature. This year's budget is based on supporting families, on supporting communities, the economy, and dealing with the serious concerns around drought that Alberta, of course, is going to be facing and so many people are discussing. I sat down with the Minister of Finance to talk about the direction for 2024, and I had a great conversation about where your money is being spent. Here is that conversation with Minister Horner. And pleased to be joined by the Finance Minister of Alberta and the President of Treasury Board, Nate Horner, to talk about the provincial budget. Obviously, a huge day. Thanks for taking some time. I know your media requests have been plentiful.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. It's been quite a day, but a good day.
Yeah. So listen, we're in the black. It's a surplus, but it's not the surplus that I think you would have forecasted a year ago. Are you happy? Are you happy overall with where we're at and the path forward?
I'm very pleased. It's taken a lot of work to get to where we are today. And like you said, it's not as big a surplus as we've seen in the past couple of years, but we saw that coming. So we knew there was going to be challenges as we prepared for Budget 24. But to be in the black, along with investing in all the places that we have in this budget, I think we've really landed in a good place.
Okay, we're going to talk about some of those ministries where some of the money is going, nearly $73 billion. But overall, I think you've labeled it a responsible plan for a growing province. Your words.
Yeah, I think that's what this is. You know, we've seen the influx of people choose Alberta. You know, over the last year, some amazing population growth numbers. So we know where the pressures are. You know, we know we need to build schools. We know that our infrastructure capital plan needs to expand. We also know we need to continue to invest in healthcare. We're still the youngest province, but we're getting oldest the quickest. So all those important investments were important to us through this process. But I know when the Premier gave me this job, she also said, we're going to balance the budget. And so that's where I started from.
One of the things that the Premier had promised during the election campaign, and I know you were a big believer in, was a potential tax cut for Albertans. You weren't able to deliver. You're taking some heat over that from people that saying it's a broken promise. Would you have been able to balance the budget had you delivered that? And will Albertans see this down the road?
Okay, I'll start with the last part of your question first. They definitely will. That is our intention, and it's laid out in the budget documents. So the plan, as we said today, is we would legislate in 2025, and we would bring in a 9% personal tax rate in 2026, followed by an 8% in 2027, completely fulfilling our promise we made to Albertans. But back to the first part of your question, if we would have implemented this year and everything else being equal, we'd have ran about a $1.1 billion deficit.
And there's no way that you and the Premier were going to do that. So, look, I get it. And I know you understand some of the pushback on it. So you mentioned healthcare, you mentioned education. There are a few things more important to Albertans, and I think Canadians in general. Build schools, you're restructuring healthcare. Of the $73 billion, a large percentage is to healthcare and education. Maybe speak to that, and is it enough?
Well, it's always a big piece of the pie, and this budget 24 is no different. I believe between health, education, and advanced education, it makes up about 61% of budget 2024, with operational increases of about 4.4% in both healthcare and education. And then a large chunk of the new pieces of the capital plan are in school investments. So there's 98 schools within the capital plan right now. 43 of those are new builds as of budget 2024.
We're going to flesh that out a little bit more. As you know, Minister Nicolaides is going to join us on the program too, and Minister Sawhney is going to come by. We're going to chat with a few different ministries about where some of this money is going. What about how about the overall philosophy of what you're doing in terms of the Heritage Fund and in terms of paying down debt? The Premier spoke to that in her State of the Province, which she gave last week, and we're going to air that as part of this program as well. But how about that philosophy to save for the future and to get debt paid off?
Yeah, and that's one of the most fascinating parts of this job. And I think we view it very much like a household would view managing their own finances. They know that there's a mortgage to pay. They also need to save for their future. It's an interesting time right now. We've seen what interest rates have done. So a lot of our debt that we're refinancing right now, we're refinancing it at a higher rate, obviously, and we have a lot of it. We have $27 billion to refinance over the next 3 years. It's never happened in Alberta before. So we're trying to manage that in the most efficient way possible. I'm so grateful we were able to pay down $13 billion in debt in 1 year, in 22-23. But we're still seeing pressure at our debt servicing line because of these rates. So what we're trying to do is re-energize the Heritage Fund. We're able to do that with the surplus we've seen in this fiscal year, 23-24, that's just ending. We're going to invest $2 billion in the Heritage Fund while allowing it to keep all its retained earnings. That was the change made in Budget 23. So it's on a path as long as government can stay committed and leave the retained earnings in the fund. As the Premier said, we're going to have some exciting news to communicate about more of that vision later in the year, but really to take it to the place that it was envisioned back in 1976.
Yeah. That
this will be, multi-generational wealth that the province can use to replace oil and gas revenue in the future, or just continue to provide the tax advantages that Albertans have now.
You're a numbers guy. What is the difference in the debt servicing on our finances? And I'll phrase it like this. So anybody watching right now knows when your mortgage comes due and you had your mortgage rate at 2% and it's suddenly 5%, your payment goes way up. What does it mean for us as a province? Like, what are we looking at in terms of numbers?
So there's nothing in any government of Alberta, any government budget that's budgeted for principal repayment. So what we pay when you see debt servicing costs, that's interest. If you want to pay down principal, you need to have a surplus. So we're trying to put ourselves in a position where that's possible. The end of this fiscal year, like I said, $3.2 billion we're able to pay down.
Okay.
What we're seeing in the bond offerings as we go to the capital markets, the last two have been between 4.6 and 4.2%. A lot of this debt, when it was originally taken, would have been in the low twos. So you're actually seeing, in many cases, a doubling of the cost.
Well, everybody can relate to what that means to the bottom line. Not every government, in fact, very few, are following the philosophy of the government here in Alberta. And I think the BC, for instance, who released its budget last week with a very different view on debt.
Definitely. I'd say besides the fact BC's an election year, that may have something to do with their government's motivation. But I would say very different. And I guess it's an interesting question because right now we're sitting at roughly the same debt servicing costs. I think BC's at $3.4 billion. We're at about 3.3 in this fiscal year that's ending. what they're projecting with what they're going to spend, their debt servicing costs by 26-27, they're projecting it at $5.7 billion.
Almost double.
What we're attempting to do is at the very least hold flat. But what our forecast shows us is that we can actually decrease the trend line on net debt to GDP, definitely net debt per capita, while growing the Heritage Fund. So we're trying to accommodate all of these things that we know are important while making those investments, to answer the growing population.
I'll follow up on that in a bit, but I want to ask you about policing, public safety. Yeah. You're a rural guy, so I think we often forget that we don't forget, but we focus so much on the problems in our big cities that we don't talk as much about rural crime. Look, rural crime's an issue too, certainly. But magnified what we see in the cities, the encampments, the issues with drugs, addiction. What are you doing to address that? And how can we assure Albertans that we're laser focused on making the streets safer?
Yeah, I think Budget 2024 answers it in a few different ways, and that so much of that problem we know is about mental health and addiction as well. So you're seeing, substantial increases in the mental health and addictions line. Some very good work coming out of public safety. Deputy Premier Mike Ellis is doing a wonderful job in that file. But Safe Streets Action Plan, we're actually adding officers in Calgary and Edmonton, 50 in each. There's also some capital going into some different equipment that they know is needed. It's going to be used from ankle bracelets to other top of the line equipment that should help. Also, big investments in justice and in continuing to modernize the court system. A lot of digital infrastructure asks. I think we're answering it that way. But you're not wrong. I hear about it in my community all the time still, and it does kind of cascade out from the big cities. So it'll remain a high priority.
Yeah. Well, that's my follow-up question. Is this a high priority for your government? Clearly, it is.
Certainly.
Minister Williams will be joining us, by the way, later in the program. We're going to talk about some of this as well. Okay. How about water, drought? We've got some snow recently, but it's been a, I don't have to tell you, it's been a drier winter than normal. Last season was dry. We've got some concerns. Minister Schultz has been speaking about them. That can burn through the contingency fund in a hurry. What are you doing to plan and prepare worst case scenarios?
Yeah, great question. Top of mind for everybody. I think I'd start with the fact that we've increased the size of the contingency in Budget 2024. It was set at $1.5 billion. We've increased it to $2 billion. Just knowing the pressures we saw last year, the entire contingency and then some was ate up between wildfire and insurance indemnities through AFSC, crop insurance, moisture deficiency insurance, and the like. So we know that pressure still potentially is looming. We've also increased forestry and parks operational budget to start the legislative wildfire season earlier, get more crews on the ground earlier to try to prepare. There's even some, I'd say, more visionary investments around upgrading our air tanker fleet in the future. Take advantage of the fact that de Havilland's chosen Alberta to build these water bombers that are sought after globally. So in the years to come, it's not in this cycle, but we'll be replacing our fleet of water bombers as well. In environment and parks, new funding around irrigation rehab, but also looking for new storage opportunities in multiple basins, and just trying to answer these questions in real time. I know Minister Schultz has spent a pile of time just communicating to all of the stakeholders, letting them know these are the few levers that we have. They're all going to require your cooperation. So those tables are already started and everyone's talking. So I think we're doing as good a job as we can for right now.
Well, your ranching background, if it's one thing that, and me as well, if it's one thing we've always talked about is the weather. Mother Nature could help us out here. We'll keep our fingers crossed on that. Look, one more question for you, Minister, and I'll let you go. Would you say you're cautiously optimistic? What would your words be going forward for the direction of our finances in Alberta?
Well, I'm very optimistic, but yeah, cautiously optimistic. I like that. I think that's the way you have to view this job, because you want to do all of these things. You want to ensure that you're investing for the needs of today, and you want to make darn sure that you have a path to a brighter future for our kids and grandkids. So whether it's debt, the Heritage Fund, the capital plan, the investments we're making now, we're trying to do all those things, but I didn't come here to do them on the credit card. So we have to be cautious in that sense.
You've been more than gracious with your time. And look, we appreciate it. Keep up the good work. And thanks for talking with us today.
Thank you very much.
One of the biggest challenges Alberta is dealing with these days is with mental health and addictions. We see it in our big cities. We see it in our smaller cities and towns and communities as mental health and addiction become more serious issues in Alberta. We wanted to address those with you and talk to the minister responsible for that file to determine where government resources are going to address those issues. And we are happy to bring that conversation with you. Here is Minister Dan Williams. So pleased to have the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction, Dan Williams, with us to discuss the budget, its impact on all of us, on Albertans. Minister, thank you for taking the time. I know you have been busy.
Well, very happy to be here with you.
I know that if we would have said, I think it's 1.5 plus billion of the budget to mental health and addiction. If you would have said we were going to have a budget that big to mental health and addiction 10 years ago, few people would have believed that. It's a sign of the times to where we are. Maybe speak to that and what your ministry is trying to do.
So I think it's a sign of the times, but it's not necessarily the case that this had to happen. Other jurisdictions don't have this kind of emphasis on mental health and addiction. Other past governments, including the NDP government, didn't invest this way in mental health and addiction. I think it's a sign of the compassionate conservative heart. I think as conservatives, we believe deeply in supporting the most vulnerable in our society. We believe deeply in making sure that the resources that we expect to be there for our family members, our friends, our community members, whether you're suffering from a mental health crisis or you're in the deadly throes of addiction, whatever it is, we want to be there for you. And so I'm very, very proud that this government is investing in this budget over $1.5 billion into mental health and addiction. It's unprecedented. And I think it speaks to the heart of a conservative government that says, we care for you. We want to be there for you.
Okay, so before we get into where the money is going, with you, I want to do this a little bit differently. Okay. Because these issues are so polarizing, frankly, but Albertans seem to be largely on side with what your government is doing. Let's talk a little bit about the Alberta way, what the philosophy is of the government and what you're trying to accomplish in your ministry, what you're pushing back against.
Right, and so that $1.5 billion has got a lot of numbers in it. The numbers can seem overwhelming. One of them is $1/3 billion, so $328 million going towards the capital build. So building out the infrastructure for the Alberta recovery model, right? So to explain that, like you said, I want to go back and just sort of give your listeners a bit of context. Alberta has taken a different approach than we've seen in Canada over the last 25, 30 years when it comes to the deadly disease of addiction and the crisis that we see unfolding on our streets, in our communities, and in our families. Instead of what I'm going to call the Vancouver model, and we can all conjure that image up of East Hastings, and even if you don't know the street name, you know the image. It's Skid Row, effectively, in Canada, and there is addiction and the carnage that flows out from that. The human pain and sorrow that comes out from the deadly disease of addiction is on full display. And it's a product of what initially was a good intention, perhaps, of what they called harm reduction. But it's now morphed into what is harm production. Nobody believes that handing drugs out to those suffering from addiction is going to help the addiction crisis. I think we all understand rationally and intuitively that it's going to fuel the addiction crisis. It's going to make things worse. Nobody thinks that drug consumption sites on every street corner in all of our communities across our province is going to get someone out of addiction into recovery. In the 4 years NDP were in, they didn't build a single recovery center.
What even is safe supply?
So safe supply is a marketing term. It's not politics as much as it is a brand, and it's an attempt to euphemize and make soft what is something that is very, very dangerous. And the progressive, radical world is very good at taking very dangerous things and packaging them in brands that feel, sympathetic and likable. And so safe supply is meant to evoke this idea that this is a safe way of acquiring your deadly and addictive drugs. And so it does not matter where the drugs come from. If there is an increase in supply for something like an opioid, say hydromorphone, which is the main drug prescribed in the federal and BC safe supply programs, they also supply even more powerful drugs, ones that are, 100 times more powerful than street heroin. They hand out en masse. And so the government of Canada has partnered with BC, for example, on their so-called safe supply program. And this is where they hand out approximately 18.25 million pills of Dilaudid every single year, unwitnessed, passed out to those in the throes of addiction in an attempt to help them. And I could not think of something more damaging for our communities and for those individuals than trying to facilitate their addiction rather than spending all of that money on recovery instead.
Okay. That explains a lot of things to people that hear this argument in the public space and say, what are we talking about here? Very well laid out.
And I just, before you go to that next question, because I want to answer it, the best way to think of this whole thing, and I just want to summarize it tightly for your listeners, is that the deadly disease of addiction ends in one of two ways. It either ends in pain, misery, and death, where you continue down the road of addiction, or it ends the other way. It ends in treatment, in recovery, and a second lease on life. And knowing that it's dichotomous, knowing that it's one of two outcomes, the government of Alberta has said, we do not want to see more of our loved ones, more of our community members, more of our family members on the street on the way towards overdose, death, pain, misery. We want to see them in recovery, which is why we are building $328 million worth of infrastructure, right?
There's your next question. Recovery communities. How are we doing it differently?
Right.
Where's this money going?
So that's exactly what we're doing differently, is we've said the outcome needs to be recovery. Otherwise, how do you expect people who have entered into this disease of addiction to find the opportunity at that second lease on life? They need to live in recovery. They need treatment. They need support. What is the purpose of having a government if not to care for the most vulnerable who are trapped by an addiction that compels them physiologically to continue seeking the high rather than eat or sleep? Right? I mean, the absolute prison that you're a part of when you're in addiction needs intervention from those who care, and that's this government. And so the recovery communities, there are 11 across the province we're building. This budget has approximately $300 million in it, $100 million of that going to Indigenous communities on reserve, where we're building with them, not over top of them or in opposition to them, but it's a proposition with our First Nation partners, not an imposition on them, where they are seeing that devastating toll, just like the rest of our communities. In fact, they're seeing it even more starkly in Indigenous First Nation communities. So what we're doing is building these centers, and they're long-term, high-quality, evidence-based treatment. If you're serious about not going down that road of producing more harm with handing out drugs in every street corner, this is the policy alternative. This is the compassionate conservative alternative to what we see in East Hastings and the Vancouver model. And so these facilities, 75 to 100 bed facilities, we have 2 online right now. These other 9 are coming, and this budget is probably the most instrumental step in getting us to that end. And very soon we're going to be at a spot where we're trying to meet that demand for treatment with our capacity. We've removed the $1,240 a month cost the NDP left in to charge someone life-saving treatment. We have the virtual opioid dependency program, which is same-day, immediate access to evidence-based medical treatment and support for those suffering from an opioid addiction. We've increased 10,000 treatment spaces over the last 5 years. These facilities are going to help us have that serious adult policy response to what is a crisis that's destroying so many communities.
Let me ask you one more. The addiction crisis. was not created overnight. It's not going to go away overnight.
That's right.
You're well aware of that. What does success look like for you as you move forward?
I mean, I'll answer in two ways. First, I'll answer as the policymaker and the minister responsible. Those 10,000 spaces, that's 10,000 individuals that got access to a service, right? That otherwise wouldn't have. That $1,240 a month that we removed, those are people, if you're in the middle of an opioid addiction, where do you expect someone to find over $1,000 a month continuously for treatment? Mm-hmm. Not a serious government about recovery if you're keeping that obstacle in place. So what success looks like to me is a society, not just a government, not just a set of policies, but a society that believes in recovery. Recovery isn't being clean and abstinent. Recovery is being a good dad and a good sister again, being a community member again, volunteering again, being an employee or employer again, being someone that has the fullness of the Alberta spirit day to day and not trapped in their addiction. That's what recovery looks like. And so success for me is seeing those numbers grow, which we see every single day. But as an individual, as an Albertan, as a father, success looks like those three men I saw last week in the Recovery Community Center who say they have never felt more hope in their life since their addiction than they have because of what this government's done, allowing them into recovery. I asked them each, where would you be today if you weren't in this recovery? And they did not miss a beat. The first thing they said was, I'd be dead. They all believed they'd be dead. That's why we invest $1.5 billion in mental health and addiction. That's why $328 million, this astronomical number, households never know. Mm-hmm. You know it when you see your communities whole again, when you see your family members recovered and a part of the fabric of the society we live in again. That's what the investment is.
Minister, you are doing incredibly important work. Thank you for it.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you for taking some time to talk to us about it.
Anytime.
You know, education is another top priority for Albertans. Of course, parents want to know what's happening in the education system. What are we doing for kids? The education budget is substantive, and we sat down with Education Minister Demetrios Nicolaides for a chat about the Alberta Budget 2024 and its impact on the Ministry of Education.
Happy to be sitting with Minister of Education Demetrios Nicolaides for a chat about the education, the budget in general, and obviously the education ministry and how it's impacted. This is the largest commitment to the provincial education budget in the history of the province, right. Nearly $10 billion. High level, what do we need to know about what is committed, and are you pleased with where the money is going to be allocated?
Yeah, I'm really pleased where the dollars are being allocated at a very high level. Where we're sitting at today, education funding will reach $9.3 billion. It's the highest level that it's ever received in the history of our province. And at a very high level, we are working in the budget to address a lot of the enrollment pressure that we're seeing. You know, the Alberta Advantage is back and booming. People are flocking to the province. People are moving here from around the world, from other provinces. And that's creating a little bit of pressure on our school boards and our schools. And it's important that we address that enrollment pressure, whether it's through increased funding so that our school boards can hire more teachers or build more schools. So this year, we're increasing funding from last year's budget by almost $400 million. That's over a 4% increase to help address some of these pressures that we're seeing.
I'm glad you started there. I was going to save that for a couple of questions from now. I had a plan on how I wanted to attack you today, but you've just screwed it right up. So let's just go right into that, Minister. It's actually a very good point. It's a blessing and a curse, isn't it, in Alberta? So many people want to come here. We're growing like crazy. But there's tremendous strain on our infrastructure, on our classrooms. And you hear it from teachers and you hear it from parents. You know, classes are getting bigger, larger. So how are you addressing it? Like, where do the dollars go, and how do you make this a smoother system?
Well, I think the important thing to highlight there is and reassure folks is the fact that the government is listening. We hear, we see, we recognize the pressures. We understand that there are challenges. And I would say not only is the government listening, but that we're taking action. And I think that's clearly demonstrated in this budget, that we are taking action to help address some of these challenges that we're seeing. As I mentioned, we're increasing operational funding by about $400 million over last year. That money is going directly to our school boards so they can manage their operations. And of course, just with any kind of organization or entity, the vast majority of that goes into salaries and benefits. So with that, they can hire more teachers, hire more staff, hire more educational assistants, and help ensure that kids are getting the support that they need. Another big component of our budget, of course, is going towards schools and to building schools, modernizing schools, making sure that we have space.
Was where I wanted to start. It's such a big thing to Albertans. Anybody watching right now is saying, "Look, our community is growing like crazy." We hear it all the time in the Premier's office as well about communities asking for more schools. How many more will we be getting? I don't want to single out areas, but I'm going to focus on Calgary and area because I know they're really expanding. Can you break down the numbers for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we in the budget, there are 43 school projects that will be moving forward. Now, school projects are at different stages of planning and development, but there are 43 projects that we'll be able to move ahead with. Approximately 19 projects will be able to move into full construction this budget cycle. And in Calgary, the significant component of that will be both in our largest urban centers in both Calgary and Edmonton, where we're seeing some of the highest pressure. It's in my mandate letter, the Premier asked me to significantly expand the number of schools in our growing communities, and that's exactly what this budget is going to do.
And it's not just the major centers, is it? It's the areas. I think of Calgary, which I know better than Edmonton. I'm sure it's the same up here with some of the communities on the outskirts. But I think Chestermere, Airdrie, Cochrane, these places around Calgary are growing rapidly as well. So that has to be part of that. I'm assuming it is.
It is, yes, definitely part of it. When we look at population increase levels in the province, it's no surprise concentrated in our two largest metro centers or urban centers, Calgary and Edmonton, and surrounding communities. The Spruce Groves, the Stoney Plains, the Chestermeres, the Airdries of the world. Airdrie will be seeing some new schools. Calgary will be seeing some new schools. Edmonton will, and other areas. Chestermere will also, and other areas will be seeing some new schools as well. More details about those individual projects will be coming over the coming days. So encourage folks to stay tuned to find out a little bit more about which specific school projects we'll be building, which ones are moving forward in the planning process, but there's a significant number of projects that are moving forward.
Good news to come. Looking forward to hearing it. What about the complexity of the classroom? You hear it all the time, and any parent understands. Look, the classroom is getting way more complex with the varying levels of support needed. Depending on the student. Are we increasing supports for teachers, more resources to help out with vulnerable Albertans? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, we are indeed. And this budget does make a new investment into funding and supports for vulnerable students. We started this last year. In Budget 23, we introduced the Classroom Complexity Grant. And this grant is specific for school boards to be able to hire psychologists, speech-language pathologists, and other individuals to help give students the individual and customized support that they need, whether to improve their writing or to get up to grade level in their reading or writing if they're not quite there yet. And we will be topping that up, specifically in the area of program unit funding, or also known as PUF funding, which is specifically for vulnerable children that need some additional support. That budget will be increasing to help ensure that they have the supports that they need in early childhood.
Okay, you mentioned that there's some announcements coming in the next couple of days, the next week or so, regarding schools, and communities and parents are going to know where they're coming. That's great news. Is there anything else that Albertans need to know about this budget, its implications on the education system? Anything you'd say to them?
Sure. I think I would say that we're increasing funding to our school boards so that we can hire more teachers. We can hire more educational assistants. We're beefing up the budget to support vulnerable students, and we're moving a number of school projects forward so that we can have the space that we need for our kids to learn in updated learning environments and the staff that they need to continue to receive a world-class education.
Well, I know your ministry gets a ton of feedback and suggestions, and great job balancing it all. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks so
Appreciate
much.
it.
Great chatting.
And the Alberta government has been investing greatly in post-secondary education and on Alberta students, trying to give them the best possible path forward to success. Advanced Education Minister Rajan Sawhney has been working very hard in that portfolio. And we sat down with Minister Sawhney to discuss the 2024 budget and its impact on the post-secondary ministry.
We are so pleased to be chatting with the Minister of Advanced Education, Rajan Sawhney, about Budget 2024, its implications on the advanced education portfolio that you, of course, your ministry. I think about your ministry, education, healthcare. I mean, every ministry is important, but there are so many stakeholders impacted by what happens in this budget. So let's chat about it. 5 major projects announced. Are you happy with this budget, and what does it mean for Albertans?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted with the budget. And you're right, so many stakeholders are impacted, and the capital projects are epic. NAIT, Red Deer Polytech, Olds College, the University of Calgary, and more. And what this funding is going to do is that it's going to create additional seats and additional capacity at these institutions. So in addition to that, the funding that we have announced for the trades is also going to open up some tremendous opportunities for Albertans.
Okay, I want to chat about the trades a little bit more.
You bet.
A lot more. Just before I do that, though, more on these 5 major projects. Is there anything specifically like NAIT, for instance, that you want to expand on? Tell us a little bit more about what will the changes be. Will there be more, availability for students, more opportunities for Albertans?
There's going to be tremendous opportunities. Now, the NAIT project is something that's very interesting. It's all about their Advanced Skills Center. So they have done some tremendous engagement with industry. And of course, with all of the new investment coming in, like the Dow project, we know that we're going to need thousands and thousands of new tradespeople, particularly welders and electricians. So this particular project is going to help them build a brand new facility, which they're in dire need of, that is going to create those spaces for students. So it's a game changer for the province, and we're absolutely thrilled to be able to fund this project.
Wonderful segue into trades, which I want to chat with you about. You made a major announcement last week in Calgary. Tell us more about what you announced, and how you hope that advances it advances things and changes things for Albertans.
You know what? That was an epic announcement, because we are funding the trades to a level that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. So Budget 2024 basically is going to provide an additional $24 million over the next 3 years to the Apprenticeship Learning Grant. And again, that's going to open up so many more seats, 3,200 seats actually, across the province at various post-secondaries. And the reason why it's important is because we have a labor market shortage in these areas. As I was mentioning, we're going to need more welders and electricians and plumbers and carpenters. So this kind of funding is actually going to create capacity, and we've had so much great feedback from our stakeholders.
Great point. I want to follow up on it some. The trades. We are so short the people that we need to build things, the infrastructure to put things together, because we're growing so quickly. The province, the population is increasing. Typically, Minister, I think, and I have a daughter graduating this year, so I can speak to this honestly. Like she's off to university, probably going to study business, and we'll leave some options open. But it's university, and the path is typically academics university for most students. How do we encourage more Alberta families to see the opportunities that exist from getting involved in the trades? Because they're high-paying jobs. You have the opportunity to be an entrepreneur, to start your own business, and there's a great need for these occupations.
You're absolutely right. And I have a daughter graduating as well, and she'll be going to U of A actually in the fall. And the reality is that there is a little bit of a stigma around the trades. And this isn't just me saying it. This is what we hear from our stakeholder community. So there's a couple of things that I always talk about when I'm talking to students and families. And number one is that The trades and any level of post-secondary education is valuable. And the trades, of course, is also a very valuable route to having economic success. So we talk about parity of esteem, which is equality in all forms of post-secondary. And so when I'm talking to students, I always point that out, that, there are so many different ways to get to that path of success that they're looking at. And trades is one of those options. And let me just give you an example, actually, of a conversation I had recently. When you're building a hospital, of course, you need doctors, you need technicians, you need nurses. But guess what? You also need electricians. You also need carpenters. You also need plumbers. You also need somebody who can operate the boiler room. So it's an essential part of our economy. And the other aspect is, what people don't realize in terms of opportunity is that you can make so much money at the outset. An electrician's average salary is over $80,000 a year. And people just don't know that. And I think I would probably end this portion off by saying some of the most successful people that I know have a background in trades.
Yeah, well said. And I know I hear the Premier talking about it all the time. And you mentioned the salary one can make. And then when you start your own business and you employ other people, of course, that gives you a greater opportunity. Hey, something else I'd like to ask you about. I think for a long time we've had an issue in Alberta and maybe across the country with the recognition of international credentials. So a doctor moves here from another country. They might have been practicing for a decade or more. Suddenly their credentials aren't recognized here, and I recognize there has to be some level of checks and balances to make sure that
Of course.
But that said, could we do better? Are we doing better to help get some of these skilled professions filled up?
You know what? We've come a long way, and this is a topic that's very important to me personally, because I often talk about my father's own journey trying to get credentialed in his profession when he moved here from India. So I know that his story is a story of thousands of Albertans and Canadians. And this government, back in 2019, was the first government to actually address this issue with any level of determination. We passed the Fair Registrations Act in 2020, and then after that, we opened up the Fairness for Newcomers office. And the work that they do there is to try to help people get through the regulatory bodies and to make sure that their credentials are assessed in a timely manner. So that is something that we're doing right now, but there's more work to be done. And I'm pleased to say that in our ministry and in our department, we're actually working on harmonizing the red seals across Canada. And we're working on labor mobility. So if somebody's a credentialed journey person in Ontario or Saskatchewan, they should be able to move to Alberta and get to work right away. And then, of course, all of the newcomers in our province, whether they're from Ukraine or, immigrants moving to Canada for the first time, there are pathways that we are improving right now as we speak, especially in the trades, to try to get them credentialed, to try to understand what those gaps are so that they can enter the labor market right away. This has been a work that's been decades in the making, but we can't be casual about this work anymore. Again, because we have a labor market shortage and there's lots of people out there who really want to get into the labor force.
Well, that speaks to your knowledge of the file, that answer. Thank you, and happy to hear the work you're doing on it. Is there anything else, Minister, that I haven't touched on or asked you about the implications of this budget on Albertans that we might need to know? And what would your message be, I guess, about the work on your file going forward?
One thing that I've realized just traveling across the province, visiting the various post-secondary institutions, is that we have an incredible education system. The colleges and the universities all across the province offer so many different courses that would be of interest to students, and students just don't know. Families just don't know. So what I would encourage families and students and other members who might be interested, other members of the public, is to take a look at the various post-secondaries in Alberta and look at their programs, particularly the trades, because the opportunities are immense. And we have so many job vacancies. For example, we were talking about electricians. They have a 90% employment rate. And there's over 1,000 vacancies right now, last time I checked. So these are the kind of messages I'd like to leave with Albertans, that the opportunities are there. You just have to dig into it a little bit more.
Minister, always appreciate speaking with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Building stronger communities is one of the priorities for Alberta's government. To do this, the Alberta government is making investments in community and social services to enhance the supports and the services that seniors and vulnerable Albertans rely on. Seniors, Community and Social Services Minister Jason Nixon sat down with me for a conversation where we discussed his ministry and the priorities with this budget.
Happy to be joined by the Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, Jason Nixon. Always good to talk to you. Thank you. When I introduced your ministry, it strikes me how much it covers: seniors, community, social services. How has the budget impacted you, your stakeholders, and your ministry? Off the top, let's start with that.
Well, we do. We have the third largest portfolio in government, as you know. So there's a lot going on, everything from homelessness to seniors and everything in between, where we need to work to be able to help care for Albertans and to make sure that our province remains the best place to live in this country. And this budget will be no different. There'll be clear, strong investments in the key areas that we've already seen us focus on as a government to keep care of the most vulnerable. Definitely you're going to see increases in age payments and income supports, but you're also going to see strong investments in housing, as well as tackling issues like rent. And then some of the big issues of our time, which is some of the issues that we see around supporting the work of mental health and addictions, to the drug epidemic we see in our province, helping care for the homeless. And then really standing up to the federal government as well, because one of our big jobs in my ministry is to make sure that we're caring for people, but we're emphasizing where the federal government is failing, particularly when it comes to things like housing or supporting Indigenous peoples inside our province.
You did a great job teeing up all the things I'm about to ask you about. You covered it all.
That's what I do.
So let's start with housing. Affordable housing, huge issue in Alberta. It's a blessing, isn't it, that so many people want to live here? But it's as I said to one of the other ministers we were chatting with, it's a bit of a curse in that we've got to have the infrastructure in place. Yeah. What are you doing to address it?
Well, we have some real challenges when it comes to housing. Part of it because of what's taken place across the country with the Justin Trudeau inflation crisis and those policies. And so we have to tackle it. And we went from a situation where we were short 20,000 houses, Bruce, to being short almost 150,000 houses by 2030. So it's a big challenge. And so the Premier has tasked us to focus on it in two areas. One is to continue to invest in what we call affordable housing. And so that would be things like seniors housing and places to help the homeless transition to permanent housing. And we are investing in that in a big way, about $9 billion. That's going to create about 13,000 new households and help another 82,000 households with things like rent supplements to be able to make sure families can pay their rent. But the other thing we're doing is we're focused on red tape reduction, working closely with our municipal partners to be able to make sure that industry can actually build the homes that we need. And we're pretty excited about it, Bruce. We're seeing record numbers across the province. We're the only place where housing is growing anywhere in the country. And just in January alone, Calgary saw the highest number of houses being built in their city since statistics were kept. So we're seeing some success, and we're going to continue to invest in that area when it comes to housing.
Good. You've got some challenges. You've got two other levels of government to work with, as you just said. You have some municipal governments doing it right, and others are a challenge, and then you've got the feds. So I guess you chatted about that a little bit. Listen, you're one of the ministers that were responsible for the encampment issue. Yeah. Now, if you live in Edmonton, or Calgary, you're well aware of what these encampments are, but there are many people watching may not be. And you got people out of these encampments and into the navigation center, which is brand new and huge success story. Can you explain to us how that works and the commitment from your government going forward?
For sure. First, I just want to reiterate why this was important to do. We had people dying. They were being burned to death inside their tents. Overdose rates were going up inside these encampments. Obviously, living in a vinyl tent in minus 50-degree weather is not appropriate. And there was abuse happening from gangs and others, including sexual abuse that was taking place inside these encampments. So we needed to take action, and we did so. We were able to clean up 129 tons of garbage as we took down these encampments. Got over 4,000 needles, for example, off the streets. And I think anybody who's traveling around Edmonton will see quite a difference in the city. And we're going to continue to do this now across the province because of the success we had in the Navigation Center. Yeah. So in a month and a half, by using the Navigation Center to tackle this issue, we had over 400 different homeless individuals come through the Navigation Center, so just about 6 weeks, receive almost 1,500 different services, everything from healthcare to addiction support, housing, getting ID, pharmacy support, you name it, wraparound services around those individuals. And they're not in encampments. They're in safe places now getting help. and hopefully going to be able to recover and go on to have very productive lives. And that is what the focus is going to be. The Premier has been clear. We are not going to allow encampments to take over our cities. We're going to help the people that are in them, but we're not going to let gangs and others take over our cities.
I spoke to Minister Williams at great length about this. Great conversation. As you know, he's doing yeoman's work in that ministry. You're supporting it and doing your own thing. So to that point, the Alberta model or the Alberta way, more on that, I guess, and how you see that moving forward.
Our job in the social services side is to support the work that Minister Williams is doing on recovery. And so what that means is we have to now reestablish how the social services system thinks and make them think about how they support that recovery work. And so you take something like housing, where our job now is to make sure that our pre-housing, i.e. homeless shelters and other components that are going into Dan Williams' programs are readjusted to work with him to do it. And then most importantly, the thing I'm most excited about is after Dan's department is able to help people recover, what does that look like? And that'd be post-treatment housing, how to get individuals into jobs, how do we make sure we give long-term support to those individuals who've successfully recovered so they don't relapse and they go on to have good lives. And so this is really exciting, the work that our two ministries are doing together. Dan is ultimately responsible to deal with that recovery issue, which is a challenge. But my job is to make sure our social services system is there to support the Alberta recovery model. And we are the only jurisdiction, frankly, in this country doing it. And Dan and I's biggest challenge is we're getting called from all over the world to say, hey, how are you guys having this kind of success, which is great. And so it's something Alberta should be very proud of.
Yeah, look, I think most of the public is on side with how you're doing this, and well done to you. It's a compassionate, conservative way to deal with this. How about seniors? Such a big part of your portfolio, a big part of our province, of course. What's new on that front, and what is the commitment from the government?
So there's a lot going on seniors, and I'm pretty passionate about the senior file in my department because I think it's so important that we make some changes to our system to make sure that the people who built our communities can remain in them. And one of the challenges I know Bruce, is that often what's happening as seniors age, they have to leave our communities. Sure. And I always say that my community is better off with grandma and grandpa there. And they certainly deserve to be there. And so we're doing a lodge review right now across the entire province to be able to make sure we understand how we fix that. That is our actual oldest social services system in the country is the lodge program in Alberta, in the province, I should say. And so it's time for it to be reviewed. But the main goal of that is to figure out how we can make sure that we can help seniors continue to age safely inside our community, their communities, and make sure that they can continue to enjoy the communities that they built.
Yep, aging in place, so important. How about a general message to Albertans as we go on I guess the directive, your mandate letter from the Premier, how you'll be approaching what you do going forward?
What we're doing, and you'll see it in this budget, is we're making sure that we can care for the most vulnerable in this province. And make sure we have real constructive solutions like what we've discussed today on recovery and removing encampments and helping seniors while doing that in a tougher fiscal time. The Premier's been clear about that. So we've been able to balance the budget, but at the same time make sure that we're investing in key areas like income supports for the severely handicapped, inside housing for seniors, helping our homeless. And I think that's the success of this budget. These are conservatives who are still able to care for the most vulnerable and still meet our fiscal responsibility. And I think most Albertans will be very proud of what we've been able to accomplish with the fiscal circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Listen, appreciate your work, appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this, and I'm sure we'll talk to you going forward.
Thanks for having me on, Bruce.
You bet.
The Premier made an address to Albertans last week where she discussed the government's priorities and philosophy with Alberta's finances and how we are best trying to prepare for the future, obviously representing the needs of today. It is a delicate balance and one that she addressed Albertans on a live broadcast last week. We thought we'd do something different this week, and we would end the broadcast with that address in its entirety. Again, it's Budget Day 2024. Thank you for being with us for this special edition as we bring you conversations with the ministers responsible for implementing this budget. And we leave you with a conversation with Premier Danielle Smith, not a conversation, but an address to Albertans on Budget 2024. Here he is, the Premier. We'll see you next time on the next Alberta Update.
My fellow Albertans, with this year's budget approaching and economists predicting softer oil and natural gas prices this upcoming year, I want to take a moment to share with you how our government intends to manage the provincial budget and finances in the years ahead. Although I'm pleased to report that spending cuts will not be needed to balance this year's budget, lower resource revenues will certainly require us to show more restraint than previously predicted. We will ensure this is done thoughtfully and with priority given to the programs and services Albertans most rely on, such as health, education, and social supports. In addition, promised personal income tax cuts will have to wait a year and be phased in responsibly. As we all know, Alberta is blessed with abundant natural resource wealth. However, the volatile price of oil and gas often has us riding a budget roller coaster from year to year. And trying to predict world oil and gas prices is much like trying to predict the weather during an Alberta spring. I suspect most of you, are growing tired of this budget volatility, bouncing between years of plenty and then having to choose between incurring massive debt or cutting key social programs is not the recurring story Albertans want to see time and again. It is time for our province to implement a long-term strategic financial plan that gets us to a stable, balanced budget each and every year with predictable and stable revenues to fund our core social programs. And that long-term plan is what I wish to talk with you about tonight. Alberta has one of the largest deposits of oil and natural gas on the planet. Through Albertans' ingenuity, hard work, and entrepreneurship, coupled with the foresight of thoughtful provincial leaders including Ernest Manning, Peter Lougheed, and Ralph Klein, our province has built itself up from humble prairie beginnings into an energy superpower with one of the most successful and growingly diverse economies in the world. In fact, that economic vitality has driven growth and opportunity right across the entire country. We have used the fruits of our vast resources to build a province of almost 5 million people with world-class cities, parks, transportation networks, schools, health facilities, and other social infrastructure. And we have established a strategic tax advantage that we are using to further attract investment and diversify our economy. We're doing a lot right, and we have much to be proud of. But as a province, we've also made mistakes, and we need to correct course now while we still have time. Bluntly stated, our province has become unsustainably dependent on non-renewable resource revenues. As an example, in Budget 2023, our province required about $16 billion of resource royalties just to balance our roughly $70 billion provincial budget. Thankfully, we had a good year and will collect enough resource revenues to cover that $16 billion, with a few billion left over to pay towards our provincial debt and savings for the future. That said, we simply cannot continue to rely on $16 billion or more in resource revenues to balance our budget year in and out. That is a recipe for massive debt and cuts to health and education when the price of oil takes a dip for a year or two or more. It is not sustainable. Some say the answer is higher income taxes or a sales tax. I reject this. We only need to look at some of our fellow provinces and many U.S. states to know that increasing these kinds of taxes to balance a budget is a recipe for economic decline. That will not be the approach of our government. Let me propose an alternative solution. Peter Lougheed had the foresight to create what is today commonly called the Alberta Heritage Fund. The initial purpose of this fund was to invest a portion of Alberta's non-renewable resource revenues each year, so the investment income earned on the fund would eventually grow large enough to eliminate our province's reliance on resource revenues when they ultimately declined. Turns out that vision was well ahead of its time. In fact, several countries, such as Norway and many other oil and gas producing nations around the world, adopted that same strategy and now boast sovereign wealth funds large enough to entirely eliminate their nation's reliance on resource revenues. In fact, these nations now earn enough each year in their funds to make massive investments in world-class infrastructure and other public benefits that were not previously possible. In Alberta, if we had just reinvested the income earned in our Heritage Fund from the Lougheed government's initial deposits of about $12 billion in the late 70s and early 80s, even without investing another extra dollar, our Heritage Fund would be worth over $250 billion today, earning between $12 and $25 billion per year in revenue. This means we would have been earning enough interest today to make us entirely unreliant on resource revenues. But for a variety of reasons from both within and without Alberta, we did not do this as a province. Of course, now's not the time for us to bemoan what might have been. In my view, the time has come to act decisively and end any further procrastination. Last year, our government passed a law mandating that all income earned in the Alberta Heritage Fund must be invested in the fund rather than spent. During the current budget year, we hope to invest and reinvest approximately $3 billion of surplus and investment income back into the Heritage Fund, increasing its value to almost $25 billion. That's up from $17 billion just a couple of years ago. This puts us back on the right track. In addition, I have instructed our finance minister to limit government spending to below the legislated rate cap of inflation plus population growth, not just during lean years with lower oil prices as we expect next year, but also in years when high oil and natural gas prices result in billions of surplus provincial dollars. Instead of spending all that non-renewable surplus cash on the wants of today, we will be fiscally disciplined, invest in the Heritage Fund annually, strategically pay down maturing debt, and slowly but surely wean our province's budget off the volatile roller coaster of resource revenues. In my view, our province has one last shot at getting this right. We still have several decades during this global energy transition where nations will desperately need our oil and gas resources for their people, and we will provide it to them with the most advanced environmental technology on Earth. So despite this coming year's predicted global economic slowdown, I believe our province is on the cusp of an unprecedented and prolonged energy resource boom, one that will include both hundreds of billions in investment and tens of thousands of new jobs, not only in oil and gas production, but also in designing and building the most advanced emission reduction technologies on Earth. It is going to be an exciting time for our province and for Canada, especially once we finally get a federal government that acts like a strategic partner rather than a delusional adversary. Prior to the end of this year, our government will publicly release a long-term financial plan charting a path to a heritage fund of between $250 and $400 billion by the year 2050. 2050 is also our target for achieving a carbon-neutral economy. Meeting these two goals simultaneously with Alberta technology, determination, and ingenuity will leave an invaluable legacy for future generations of Albertans and Canadians. There is no doubt in my mind we are capable of achieving these goals, but we need to start today and stick with it fervently, year after year. I ask for your support as our government commits itself to placing our province on this path to prosperity that will last long after our last barrel of oil has been produced. We, our children, and their children deserve nothing less. Thank you, good night, and may Alberta remain forever strong and free.